For 250,000 years, one predator dominated the Americas like no other canid before or since. It roamed from the forests of the eastern seaboard to the sun-baked grasslands of California, from the highlands of Bolivia to the coasts of Venezuela. Wherever large prey gathered, this animal was there. Hunting in packs, pulling down prey twice its size, competing face-to-face with saber-toothed cats, the American lion, and the giant short-faced bear, and holding its ground. We know this because of one place more than any other, the Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. Beneath the surface of what is now downtown LA, natural asphalt seeped up through the earth for tens of thousands of years, trapping anything unlucky enough to step in it. And when a large herbivore got stuck, predators came to feed and got trapped themselves. Over 4,000 of these animals have been pulled from La Brea. 4,000. More than every other large mammal species at the site combined. More than the saber-toothed cats, more than the lions, more than the bears. No large predator in the Pleistocene has a fossil record that even comes close. You already know its name, and you think you know what it was. The dire wolf. It looks like a wolf. It's built like a wolf. It hunted like a wolf. For over 150 years, every scientist who studied it classified it as one. Just a bigger, heavier, more powerful version of the gray wolf we know today. They were wrong. In 2021, a team of geneticists did something no one had ever managed before. They extracted ancient DNA from dire wolf bones, not from La Brea. Asphalt destroys DNA, but from specimens buried in sediment in Wyoming, Idaho, Ohio, and Tennessee. Out of 46 bones they tested, only 5 gave usable genetic material, but 5 was enough. What those genomes revealed wasn't a close cousin of the gray wolf. It wasn't even in the same genus. The dire wolf had split from the lineage leading to every living wolf, dog, coyote, jackal, and dhole roughly 5.7 million years ago. To put that in perspective, that's around the same time our ancestors diverged from chimpanzees. That's how far apart these two animals are. The dire wolf isn't a bigger wolf. It's not a wolf at all. Every similarity, the body shape, the pack hunting, the pursuit of large hoofed prey, is convergent evolution. Two completely separate lineages on two separate continents, independently arriving at the same solution to the same problem: how to be a large social predator that kills big things. The ancestors of gray wolves, coyotes, and dholes evolved in Eurasia. The dire wolf evolved here in the Americas in total isolation. By the time gray wolves finally crossed into North America around 20,000 years ago, the two lineages had been apart for so long that they couldn't even interbreed. And every other canid species that was more closely related to the dire wolf, already extinct. Gone. Every single one. The dire wolf wasn't just a different species. It was the last survivor of an entire lineage of American canids that no longer exists. A branch of the evolutionary tree that has been completely and permanently severed. Its scientific name used to be Canis dirus, fearsome dog, filed in the same genus as the gray wolf. After the DNA results, scientists revived a name that had been proposed in 1918 and ignored for a century. Anocyan dirus, terrible dog, a genus of its own, because that's what the genetics demand. And once you understand that, once you stop seeing this animal as a wolf, everything about its life, its success, and especially its extinction starts to look very different. If you're picturing a dire wolf right now, there's a good chance you're picturing the wrong animal, and you can thank George Martin for that. In Game of Thrones, dire wolves are massive, Arctic predators prowling the frozen wastelands beyond the wall. Ghost is pure white. The message is clear. These are wolves, but bigger, colder, more dangerous. Almost none of that is true. A real dire wolf stood about 80 centimeters at the shoulder. Nose to tail, maybe 1.5 meters to 1.8 meters. It weighed 60 to 70 kilograms on average, with the biggest individuals pushing 80. That's roughly the size of the largest gray wolves alive today, the ones in the Yukon and northwest Canada. You wouldn't mistake it for a horse. You might not even realize it wasn't a regular wolf if you saw one at a distance. Up close, though, you'd notice the differences. The skull was wider and more heavily built, with a pronounced ridge along the top, where massive jaw muscles anchored. That broader skull housed a bite that no living canid can match, a bite force quotient of 163 newtons per kilogram of body mass, the highest ever recorded in a placental mammal canid, higher than the African wild dog, higher than the gray wolf. The teeth told the same story. Oversized carnassials built for sharing meat. Canines with the bending strength of a hyena's, designed not just for biting, but for holding on to something that desperately didn't want to be held. The limbs were shorter and thicker than a gray wolf's, especially in the western populations. Less built for endurance running, more built for power. This wasn't an animal that chased prey across open tundra for kilometers. This was an animal that closed distance, latched on, and brought things down through sheer collective force. And it wasn't quiet about it. Research on the hyoid bone, the small bone in the throat that supports vocalization, shows that dire wolves was larger and more robust than in gray wolves. It would have vocalized at a noticeably deeper pitch. If gray wolves howl, dire wolves rumbled. Now, where did this animal actually live? Not the frozen north. The dire wolf has never been reliably found above 42 degrees north latitude. Its range stretched through both American continents into Bolivia, Peru, Venezuela, and possibly as far south as Chile. The densest populations lived in what is now the American South, the Great Plains, and the Pacific Coast. Places that during the late Pleistocene were temperate grasslands, open woodlands, and coastal savannas. The Brea Tar Pits sit in the middle of Los Angeles. 50,000 years ago, the climate there was similar to modern-day Monterey. Cool, coastal, maritime. Not Arctic, not frozen. The dire wolf was an animal of mild to warm landscapes, not a creature of ice and snow. What it was, without question, was a hyper-carnivore. At least 70% of its diet was meat from large herbivores. Isotope analysis of its bones tells us what it ate. Ancient horses and bison made up the bulk, with camels, ground sloths, and occasionally even mammoth and mastodon on the menu. This was an animal that depended entirely on megafauna, the giant herbivores of the Pleistocene. And that dependence shows up in the bones in an unexpected way. When researchers examined the teeth of dire wolves from La Brea across different time periods, they found something striking. Between 15,000 and 14,000 years ago, right before the extinction, tooth breakage rates spiked. Far more cracked and shattered teeth than in earlier periods. That's a signature of carcass competition. When prey becomes scarce, carnivores don't just eat the muscle, they crack the bones. They fight harder over kills. They eat everything, and their teeth pay the price. The dire wolf's world was already falling apart thousands of years before the species vanished. The bones were telling the story before the ending arrived. 13,000 years ago, the dire wolf disappeared. Across its entire range, North America, Central America, South America, it was gone. The most common large predator on 2 continents, with a fossil record unmatched by any other Pleistocene carnivore, simply ceased to exist. It wasn't alone. The dire wolf vanished alongside the animals it had spent millions of years hunting. The ancient horses, the camels, the ground sloths, the mammoths and mastodons, the giant bison. In the span of a few thousand years, the entire megafaunal ecosystem of the Americas collapsed, and everything that depended on it went with it. For a generalist, that's survivable. Gray wolves eat elk, but they'll take rabbits. Coyotes eat anything. When the big prey disappeared, those animals adapted, shifted their diets, kept going. The dire wolf couldn't do that. Its entire body was a commitment to killing large things. The massive skull, the reinforced teeth, the powerful short limbs. 70% or more of its diet was megafauna. When that food base disappeared, it had nowhere to go. But starvation alone doesn't explain why the dire wolf died while the gray wolf lived. They were the same size. They hunted the same prey. They occupied the same territory. On paper, they should have faced the same odds. The difference was genetic. Gray wolves and coyotes do something that canids are unusually good at. They hybridize. They interbreed with each other, with domestic dogs, with other closely related species. And that interbreeding isn't just a curiosity, it's a survival mechanism. North American gray wolves picked up the gene for black coat color from domestic dogs. They acquired immune adaptations, allelase for hypoxia tolerance at high altitudes. Every time they interbred with a related species, they gained access to a wider pool of genetic tools for dealing with a changing world. The dire wolf couldn't do any of that. 5.7 million years of independent evolution had made interbreeding impossible. By the time gray wolves arrived in North America, the two lineages were so divergent that their genomes were no longer compatible. And every canid species that was closely related to the dire wolf, the ones that might have served as hybridization partners, was already extinct. So the dire wolf faced the end of the Pleistocene alone. No genetic lifeline, no borrowed adaptations, just a shrinking prey base and a body built for a world that no longer existed. And the bones tell us it got worse before the end. Hundreds of dire wolf specimens from La Brea show signs of osteochondrosis dissecans, a developmental joint disease with a strong genetic component. It's the kind of condition that shows up in inbred populations. Modern dog breeds with small gene pools get it. The dire wolf was getting it too. The population was shrinking. The gene pool was narrowing, and the damage was showing up in their skeletons. A specialist predator losing its prey. A species that couldn't hybridize losing its genetic options. A shrinking population turning inward and breeding with its own relatives. The dire wolf didn't go extinct for one reason. It went extinct because every escape route closed at the same time. 12,900 years ago, the last one died, and with it, an entire lineage of American canids. Tens of millions of years of evolutionary history ended permanently. Or so we thought. In October 2024, a biotechnology company called Colossal Biosciences announced that it had done the impossible. 2 pups born to a domestic dog surrogate genetically engineered to be dire wolves. They named them Romulus and Remus. A third, Khaleesi, followed in January 2025. The internet lost its mind. George R.R. Martin visited the pups, reportedly broke down in tears, and compared the moment to the moon landing. There was just one problem. They aren't dire wolves. What Colossal did was take gray wolf cells and edit 20 genes across 14 locations in the genome. They targeted size, muscle density, fur color, fur length. The pups are pale-coated, stocky, striking animals. They look the part, but 20 gene edits out of roughly 2.5 billion base pairs is not de-extinction. It's cosmetic engineering. The dire wolf genome differs from the gray wolf genome at approximately 12 million positions. Colossal edited 20 of them. The pups don't have the dire wolf's wider skull. They don't have the reinforced carnassial teeth. They don't have the shortened, powerful limbs. They don't have the deeper vocal anatomy. They have none of the things that made a dire wolf, because those traits are the product of millions of years of evolution across thousands of interacting genes, not a handful of targeted edits. Nearly every independent scientist who weighed in said the same thing. These are gray wolves. Genetically modified gray wolves with a good marketing story, but gray wolves. One paleontologist put it simply, that is no more a dire wolf than I am Wonder Woman. Even one of the geneticists behind the original 2021 DNA study, the one that proved dire wolves weren't wolves in the first place, eventually described the colossal animals as gray wolves with 20 edits that are cloned. And there's an irony here that's almost too perfect. The entire reason we know the dire wolf isn't a wolf is that its DNA told us so. And now, a company is claiming to have brought the dire wolf back, using the DNA of the one animal we just proved it wasn't related to. The dire wolf's been 250,000 years as the apex canid of the Americas. It thrived, not because it was a wolf, but because it had found its own path, its own body plan, its own lineage, its own answer to the question of how to be a predator. And when the world changed, that path led to a dead end. Not because the dire wolf failed, but because specialization always carries that risk. The gray wolf survived by being flexible, by having porous genetic boundaries, by being willing, at the molecular level, to borrow from its neighbors. The dire wolf couldn't borrow from anyone. It was alone at the end. And it's still alone now, because even our best technology can't fake what evolution spent millions of years building.